Okay, so this is chapter 2 of my mother's book, Finding Inner Place. And actually, it's not chapter 2. I'm kind of going to skip around a little bit. And trying to see. I guess this is chapter 2, and I only read part of chapter 1. There are several other locations in chapter 1, including South Carolina and Mexico. And as well as an awesome recipe. There are recipes, I don't think you can see it, but there's recipes all throughout this book. My mom was an amazing, is an amazing, let me correct myself, is an amazing cook. So if you get a chance to get any of the recipes in here, you're going to die for it. Super, super, super good food. So, okay, so this is chapter 2, I'm guessing. It's called What Creates Place. In chapter 1, we kind of read a little bit of the chapter about what is place, even though we only read like a third of the chapter. At least gave you an idea. So I'm going to read just a little bit of this chapter, and it has some really funny things in it, and it's way funnier for me because I know they're completely 100% true. So hopefully you guys can enjoy this as well. Alright. It's pretty easy to paint a picture and get all gooey about far ports and exotic shores, but what factors combine to create your own sense of place, your own identity? And how do you define identity anyway? All your quirky traits and secret plans and unique talents are like squares of cotton that you know should make a quilt. But not only can you not figure out how to put them together, you don't even know where they all are. Some stashed under the bed and others in the dusky corner of the closet, save for a project that you can never seem to find time for. You have so many different attributes, different colors, different fabrics, and like a quilt, all your pieces are connected. When you step back from the finished product, small triangles and squares become huge swaths of background color and interlocking circles. The individual pieces merge and a pattern appears. This is where you discover the beauty. In the blending of all the bits, like a quilt, you and your home are so much more than the sum of your parts. The problem is, how do you zoom in on these details? Because in order to get a solid sense of your identity, it helps to look at the pieces, to pull the quilt apart, and see what colors and shapes blend together to make the whole. And so we will just attempt to do just that. The Vermont quilt. Weather. Weather is cold, dark, icy. Weather is invigorating, bright, and powdery. I guess every story has two sides, but one thing is for certain at our home in northern Vermont. Winter was inescapable. Lasting often from October to May, the season promised everything from frostbite to sugar on snow. We bundled mittens and boots in the baskets by the front door and stashed a blanket and a piece of old carpet in the car truck. A piece of carpet provides great traction when you're stuck in the snow. Shovel lived inside so we could bury to the car on nor'easter mornings. We stocked up on groceries and installed a wood stove, and I learned how to drive. I mean, able to do a controlled 180 on an icy incline so I wouldn't have to slide backward down the winding hill when the road was a sheet of ice and it was obvious I wasn't going to make it home. Extreme weather pushes you out of your comfort zone. I was forced to be both independent and dependent. I saved ashes from my wood stove to spread on the road when the sand truck didn't come through, and I learned just where to shovel and where to spread so my neighbor, whose car tires were spinning at the crest of the hill in front of my house, could get going again. I also had to be willing to knock on the door of a complete stranger when my car was stuck in the snowbank and I couldn't rock myself out. This combination of resourcefulness and gracious receptivity, though learned reluctantly, wove itself into everything. My home became a haven for friends and strangers, not because I planned it that way. It's just what living in winter weather does. It shapes you, and if you don't bend, you break. So weather becomes the first piece of that place quilt. I bet you never figured that weather would have anything to do with it, or to do with your identity. But you can see how it affected who I am. Sometimes we think we are free to simply choose our values, but I find that sometimes they choose us. Contending with winter's bite added to the challenges I faced, but it wasn't the only thing about living in Vermont that formed who I am today. Landscape. My home was perched on the side of a mountain. The stunning view encompassed miles of rolling cornfields, paint-dropped villages, and distant sparkling waters of Lake Champlain, the sixth biggest freshwater lake in the U.S. The rocky soil was not well suited for a vegetable garden, but in the fleeting summer daylilies grew rampant and moss-covered boulders provided places for my sledging rock climbers to play. Even we adults enjoyed exploring thickets of crabapples and discovering hidden caves in the undergrowth. Hiking became a favorite pastime, of course, just a walk down into town to visit friends or stop at the corner store for a gallon of milk consisted of a hike, especially when my 4-year-old decided he was too tired to walk and had to be carried back up the hill. But more than that, we tramped through the woods exploring pristine streams, shimmying up ledges, and using tree roots and saplings to add stability to our descent into secret valleys. I learned to love the outdoors, to connect with the earth in a very personal way. To this day I find myself going outside shoeless and standing in the grass just to feel the earth beneath my feet. It makes me feel grounded, connected, part of something bigger than myself. Flora. But it wasn't just the land that held me in its spell. The overarching presence of living giants had a profound effect on me. Acres of sugar maples, papery barked birches, and towering white pines held positions of sentry, guarding the mountainside. Their stalwart trunks and leafy appendages provided a sense of security and safeness, a place to hide. They also provided forts and climbing opportunities for the kids, homes for wildlife, and food for the table. In early spring we tapped the maple trees, and in the fall we harvested apples. How do you separate yourself from something like trees? When you live in the forest, they are so much a part of your everyday that you cannot imagine life without them. The forest presented its own dangers, too. It was vast and unforgiving, growing across steep ledges and confusing ridges. Occasionally we got turned around just yards from the home, and come out of the woods in a completely unexpected place. I made the kids promise they would always stay inside of the house, because if they headed into the woods in the wrong direction, they could easily get lost in the 37,000 acres of Mount Mansfield National Forest. So you can see how something the trees were tied to my experience living in Vermont. They were an important part of my place quilt. But they certainly were not the only plants that had impact on how I lived on my rocky hillside. The shallow soil and dappled shade offered the perfect setting for an organic herb garden. I grew armloads of sweet basil and peppermint, oregano, spearmint, sage and thyme, dill and lavender. The cool summers kept the herbs sweet all season, and in the fall the kids and I gathered bunches and hung them upside down in the kitchen to dry. With so many herbs on hand, I found my kitchen pungent with rosemary, uh, baked potatoes, crusty dill bread, and homemade peppermint tea. Fauna. Living on the mountainside at the edge of the national forest, it also offered some unique wildlife experiences. Shy white-tailed deer came to nibble the sour fruit from our gone-wild apple tree. Coyotes chattered late into the night. Porcupines, foxes, bobcats, and even mountain lions haunted the hillsides. One afternoon my youngest son came running into the house to inform me that a tall horse with no one riding it was standing in the backyard. I hurried outside to find a lanky young moose ambling across the lawn. But the most exciting story unfolded late one January morning. It was one of those warm days when Mother Nature tries to trick you into believing spring is right around the corner. My 10-year-old middle child, Michael, who had been out playing with our black lab Tamara, burst into the house in a state of panic. He could hardly talk, and I feared something awful happened. Between gasps, he explained that Tamara had stolen his mitten and he chased her into the woods. Of course she outran him. He was following her trail through the snow, and when he surprised a black bear, or the black bear surprised him, or really both, I imagine, the bear reared up to its full height and Michael froze. Then the furry Goliath dropped down on all fours and lumbered toward Michael, sniffling, until it was just several yards away, at which point it stopped. When Michael still didn't move, he was in shock. The bear shuffled and snuffled some more, coming closer. Michael snapped out of his momentary paralysis, turned and bolted. Surprisingly, his great dismay as he sputtered his story had nothing to do with a concern for his own safety. He was terrified the bear had eaten our dog. Thankfully, as soon as Michael finished his tale, Tamara came bounding through the snow and crashed past us into the house, shaking melting chunks of ice across the oak floor. The black bear, we discovered, probably had no intention of hurting Michael or the dog. After a little research, we learned the bear's behavior is called a bluff charge. Michael startled the creature, and it was just trying to scare him off. Needless to say, I was very thankful all parties were safe. Living in such close proximity to wildlife certainly had its challenges. I think I'll stop there. This is a long chapter, but it goes on to talk about architecture, language, food, history and art, industry, entertainment and community, values, and how all of those things have a story in your own life and what piece of the quilt they may hold. So anyway, again, this is Finding Inner Place by my mother, Laura Labrie, who I love very much. And like I said in the first video that I was reading the first chapter, the further you get into it, just the more exciting it gets. And super humbling stories in here. Some awesome, awesome recipes. Like, let me see if I can find one. Let's see. Soft shell crab sandwiches. Hot cinnamon applesauce. We used to make applesauce when we were kids. Like, peel the apples, cut them up, put them in this apple thing that was made out of wood and metal, and we just had to like manually crank it, and we made applesauce as kids, and it was amazing. So anyway, all these awesome recipes are in here. Cream cheese, make your own cream cheese, bagels, black bean burritos or burgers, burritos, chicken salad, a little bit of everything. All, of course, from different places that my mom has visited and some of my mom's special recipes. So that is part of chapter 2. And if you like it, you can buy it at Amazon. I'll post a link below. Otherwise, if you want to be part of the Book Around the World event, and write your name in the book and pass it on to somebody next to read it, that would be awesome. But thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I love you all. Mwah.